Evolving language. We've talked about that in our group as well with doing this kind of research. It doesn't, just during the period of time that we were doing the research, language evolved. And so even around from the time we sent the proposal in until we did the research, we had to move away from how we were describing the folks that we were interested in supporting. And we landed on underrepresented, that they were the people who were in the community, but you weren't seeing in the same numbers in the workplace. We're seeing communication stay large here. You know how word clouds work, I'm sure, and the kinds of words that have been used the most often get bigger. And then we're seeing a lot of other challenges that people have experienced. So sometimes lack of information, sometimes understanding different ways of learning. And as an educator, I know that there's lots of discussion around multiple intelligences or around whether or not there are different learning styles or we should be catering to different learning styles. And I think part of inclusivity is very much empowering the individuals that you're working with to bring their best selves to the learning environment, and whatever that might look like in terms of reading, having audio, being able to record something and listen to it later. There's so many different approaches that can really help to strengthen someone's opportunity to learn successfully. So I'd like to take a moment for the panelists to look at this Mentimeter, and we will share it, of course, with everyone after read something that is shifting and the printing's getting tinier and tinier. But I would like you to look at it and say, what's one challenge from the Menti results that really resonated with you and why? And so what practical tip could you offer regarding that challenge?
So the part of the Mentimeter that stands out the most, of course, is communication. And a big part of communication is our language. And so I want to talk a bit about the evolving language piece. And that one of the things that is evolving for me and for our community of practice is the way that we refer to the people who come in to accept services, and to really start to shift from a client kind of deficit framework to a more agencyed service participant framework, and to really start to look at how do we describe the people who we serve. And really, when we talk about a service participant, we are talking about somebody who is more an equal partner in the learning experience and an equal partner in the learning or in the service that's being provided. Whereas a client comes out of the sort of medical model of deficit and a lack of something that we bring to the table. And so a simple thing like how we describe the people that we serve is an important part of the evolving language and how we communicate and what we're communicating in the words that we're choosing.
Thank you for that, Shauna. And it also reflects the different settings that we find ourselves working in, because as a counselor educator, I work to shift people from patient to client, like clients seem less medical than patient. And so now moving from client to participant or to service participant, I think is, a really great example of that ongoing evolution as we become more aware. Thanks so much for that. Trina, any challenge from the Menti results that really jumped out at you?
Sure. The one that I gravitate towards and which I find is really a foundational as a trainer, regardless of the setting, is that element of building trust. It's so important whether I'm working, as I said, with community practitioners who come in with a variety of experiences, or I'm directly working with community members. We have to establish trust, and that's really a two-way street. And a lot of it goes to our our own teachings and understanding that, you know, as a trainer, I've worked in every province and territory, so I'm often stepping into different traditional territories. And so part of that trust building is getting to know the people that I'm working with and getting to know what their protocols are and sharing my story with them so that they feel they can share their story with me and we can work together. And sometimes we don't always have the privilege of having time to build trust. Sometimes we have to do it rather quickly. And so by being authentic and genuine upfront as a trainer and being comfortable with our own story, I think that goes a long way in facilitating that trust building with others, because it's, as I said, it's really foundational to a lot of the work that we do, whether it's directly with clients in that training situation or with other practitioners. People follow and want to engage with those that they trust, and so we often also have to ask the question, I think, not making assumptions as to what does trust building look like from the perspective of the other person that you're working with. And sometimes we don't often ask the question, we make assumptions. So my tip is to take that step back and to ask the question and really listen for the response and then work together to get towards that place of trust building.
Oh, thanks for that, Trina. And we know from the common factors research in counseling how, you know, that's essential to that working alliance. That's foundational to all of the work that we do together. And in the Practice Principles book that Sarah recently published, you know, going across 43 theories and models, connect was one of the core practices that is essential. If you don't do that, you're not going to get anywhere. So thanks for focusing on that for us. Annette, any challenge from the Mentimeter results that really felt like a fit for you?
I'm going to ladder onto what Trina was sharing. I see some of the people here today have been part of my classes, and I am really big on storytelling. And I think that when it comes to communication, plain language, you know, cross-cultural sort of informed practice, that a story can embed the learning in such a unique way that it transcends all those other kinds of barriers, right, to capturing the essence of what it is you're trying to share. And I think it takes skill and art and practice to know that the stories, when you share them, when they can relate, and that they all have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that they're concise. And so I remember taking a course at UFV early in my training, and it was actually from an Indigenous elder on storytelling. And if any of you have a goal of, you know, learning for the next year or whatever you might have, I would suggest to teach or to get some training in storytelling. And I think that made a big difference in delivery of training that I delivered. Yeah.
Oh, thanks for that tip. I want to look up that course now. And Heather, what from this list has jumped out at you or really resonated with you, and what practical tip could you offer us?
Engagement was a big one.
Mm.
Engagement is it's the key to everything. I think in all walks of life, in all areas of life, engagement is the big thing. A lot of people like to jump in feet first and not listen, or take the time to learn what practices would be done in a hardware store. So engagement, being engaged with them, taking the time, making sure that they understand that they're heard, like, and that you actually do hear them. And I think with that, if they know that they're being listened to and heard and they matter, then engagement will naturally go up.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And engagement is something that there's a lot of literature on from the employer and workplace perspective. So it's something we really need to pay attention to. Cassie just posted in the chat that there was an inquiry. What's the importance of authenticity and self-awareness of the trainer to enhance the trust? I don't know if any of the panelists want to jump in on that question before we move on.
I'd be happy to talk about that for a moment. I think that that authenticity is understood by everyone in the room when authenticity is present and when it's absent. And in order for those stories to land for people, in order for people to feel a sense of trust in the room, it's essential for trainers to be their authentic self, even if that authentic self is different than who you were trained with. So to really bring your authentic self into the room.
Thanks for that, Shauna. Yeah, I think the self-awareness piece as well is really important. Annette mentioned stories have a beginning, middle, and an end. And so I know often there's mixed teaching on self-disclosure. How much of our own story should we be sharing? And I think when it's authentic and intentional and focused on, it's centered on the participant that you're sharing that story with, or the participants you're sharing that story with, then it can be really meaningful. And sometimes our self-awareness would allow us to silence ourselves as well and say, this isn't the time for that story, or that wouldn't be the best example, or I wouldn't be the best example. What else could I bring in that would be something that would resonate more with this individual?
Roberta, if I could add that the word vulnerable is coming up in my mind over and over. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a power imbalance when we are expecting the individuals we support to be so vulnerable with their own struggles to employment or with just life in general. And I know we're going to get to the safety aspects and so mm-hmm. on. But if we're not in turn vulnerable in some way, then we don't have any kind of a symbiotic relationship. Like, what would we expect from the individuals we're supporting if we can't share some sort of vulnerability? And I don't mean that to sound like it's not weakness. It's strength in the knowing who you are as a person, and you'll know when you should be sharing something or shouldn't, or share a story, whatever that might be. But I think in order to de-escalate that power imbalance that sometimes comes from the work we do, we need to be able to be comfortable with who we are and when we're going to be vulnerable.
Yeah, thank you.